You know, I'm a big fan of Lanny McDonald, even though he never played against with the Montreal Canadiens. He scored a winning goal in the '89 Stanley Cup for Calgary, but his goal in Game 7 of the 1978 quarterfinal against the New York Islanders stands as a test of perseverance. He was injured previously in the season. He was wearing a full mask. He must have skated miles in that famous Game 7 where he scored a winner in overtime. But there's a lot of details about that contest people don't talk about. Yes, it was a very good goal, but two very prominent Islanders choked on the play, while three other players could have ended the game in overtime for the Islanders, and failed in the attempt. So today we're going to be talking about the April 29th miracle. That's what we're going to call it today. At the Nassau Coliseum, the fans were rabid that night. If they could have killed Toronto that night, the fans were just going nuts. Nassau Coliseum was a hard rink to play in. A lot of people felt there could be this was the Stanley Cup. Whoever's going to win this would win the Stanley Cup, but a lot of people thought the Islanders were going to win. So the series opened in New York. Now, according to what Brian McFarland had said, I think Toronto had lost every overtime game they had played over the last number of years. They lost the first two games in New York 4-1, and the Islanders won 3-2 in overtime in Game 2. Now, a 2-day break, it went back to Toronto, and he shut down the Islanders' big line of Trottier, Bossy, and Gillies. They won 2-0 at home. Mike Palmateer stood on his head and won 3-1 in Game 4. Now, Game 5, again, went to overtime. The Islanders won 2-1. Now, just like Game 6 between Montreal and Boston in 71, where Boston had dominated in Game 5, you thought the series was done. But the Toronto offense came on April 22nd. Now, there's very little break in the series. They're playing every second night. So, the contest, Game 6, a big early lead for Toronto. Daryl Sittler, Jack Valiquette, of all people, he's first in the playoffs. Lanny McDonald was having a hard time in the series on the power play. And Stan Weir, old reliable, 4-0 after 1. Bad Poutet, the Gila Fleur Keller, scored at 4:36 in the second. Now, Gillies and Bob Bourne scored the third period to make it decent at 5-2. Now, Palmateer made 35 saves, but Billy Smith was pulled. Glenn Rush was pulled in the contest, only having 3 saves on 7 shots. Sorry about that, a little bit of a tickle. Billy Smith came in, so you figured, hey, they're going to play Billy Smith in Game 7. No. Dennis Potvin scored his second of the postseason at 5:18. But Ian Turnbull at 3:42 scored. Now, there was no scoring in the next 27 minutes. Now, the 4 minute and 13 seconds of overtime, I called that 273 seconds of glory. This is what happened. Palmateer stood and he said, Clark Gillies almost scored in the first few seconds of overtime. Billy Harris got a breakaway on a broken play, and Palmateer stopped him, and then Eddie Westfall, the veteran, the former Boston Bruin, almost scored. Now, what happened? Ian Turnbull and Trevor Johansson were quarterbacking the defense. Johansson had the puck, very good puck handler. Turnbull, he threw the puck in his zone. Now, McDonald broke through 2 players. Who were these 2 players? Clark Gillies gave up on the play. Dennis Potvin was lazy coming back, and he put the puck past Rush, and of course the famous, he threw the gloves in the air in the big celebration. Glenn Rush threw the stick in the air. So the contest has been re-uploaded to YouTube, and it's probably one of the best moments in Toronto Maple Leaf history. Not because they're going to win the Cup that year, but this was a team that year was basically not a good balanced team. They had some good young stars, but they were relying too much on Sittler and McDonald. And that's why they almost lost the series, because Lanny and Daryl were being held back by the big thing. Now, this is the rookie season for Mike Bossy, and he was not a factor in the series. Even in Game 7, you'd think, hey, there was going to be a breakthrough. So we're going to look at the roster of the 1978 Toronto Maple Leafs. How in the heck did this team do enough to win? So, like I said, mixture young and old. But he had a solid lineup. Daryl Sittler that season, 117 points. 100 minutes and penalties. Very rare someone to get 100 minutes and penalties back then. 100 or more than 100 points. Lanny had 47 counters. Boris Salming had a tremendous season. 76 points and plus 30. Turnbull had a decent season. 61 points, 14 goals. But Ronnie Ellis stood up for me. Big 50 points, 26 goals. 3 goals in a power play. And 5 game winners to be second on the team. Tiger had 19 goals. Errol Thompson had 39 points. Pat Boutet had 17. Now, Bruce Boudreau in marginal action, 11 goals. And the very underrated George Ferguson had 7 goals and 23 points and was -9. Jack Valiquette had 8 counters. But Stan Weir, playing only 30 games, had big 12 big goals. Brian Glennie had 17 points. Jerry Butler had 16 points. Trevor Johansson, 16 points. Jimmy Jones, that defensive whiz, had only 13 points, but he was worth. Randy Carlyle was there, of course, 13 points in 49 games. Mike Pellick, Dan Maloney, Jim McKinney, Kurt Walker, Ronnie Wilson, John Anderson in his first season with the team, Don Ashby, Inger Armstrong wasn't there at the end, Alain Boulanger, Bobby Neely, Mike Palmetier, what a great season. 63 games played with Gord McRae as a backup. Palmetier had it would be an MVP season, but back then it was based on average. 34, 19, and 9, 274 average, while Gordon McRae had 7 goals, 7 wins, 10 losses, and 1 tie. Turnbull was the playoff star for Toronto, 16 points in the postseason. Like I said, Sittler only had 3 goals. McDonald only had 3 goals. Had a hard time against Montreal, losing in the semifinals. Georgie Ferguson, though, had 5 counters. Pat Boutet had 3. Jimmy Jones had 1. Ronnie Ellis, 3 big goals. Stan Weir, again, his last big gasp with Toronto, 3 goals. Salming, injured most of the postseason, only had 4 points. Maloney had a goal. Valiquette, Tiger Williams 1. Johansson played 13 contests. Butler had 13 1 goal. Carlisle, Pellick, John Anderson, Brian Glennie, Palmetier, and Kurt Walker. Now, Palmetier with a 242 average with 2 shutouts. Again, he lost all 4 games against Montreal. But the idea, ladies and gentlemen, why Toronto won the series. That was 2 series to 1. Like nowadays, you would get your right in the semifinal. But I think what really burned them out. They had to take on what he called the first round. But Toronto, ladies and gentlemen, the big thing when he signed Jimmy Jones, from all people, the Rochester Americans, as a free agent. Now, they let Wayne Thomas go on waivers in October, which opened up for Palmetier. And, of course, different trades during the year we're going to go over. Hammerstrong was traded for Jerry Butler. Neely was sent to the Rockies for cash. Claire Alexander was sent for cash. But Errol Thompson, again, traded for Don Maloney. And also the second-round pick was Craig Mooney, of all people. Bob Neely was picked up, went to Colorado for cash for Bob Neely, came back. Carlisle and Ferguson, again, Dave Burrows, the big deal. And again, the later on, the Brian Glennie trade. So they got rid of Carlisle after the season was done. They got rid of the cleaned house. The Carlisle, Ferguson, Glennie, Walker, Scott Garland, and again the various teams. So there was big replacements: Neely, Burrows, Dave Hutchinson, Lawrence Stammer, Paul Harrison, the backup. But the Toronto Maple Leafs were full marks for the victory against the Islanders. Now, the Islanders didn't have Butch Goring, of course. They had player, but Billy Harris missing on that breakaway. There's no way in the world that number 1 draft pick, because Billy Harris was kind of being used as a defensive player, and eventually allowed him to be traded. He took away his offense. Now, Billy Harris was good enough to be a practice player with the 1972 Team Canada Summit Series. So what if you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, you're not interested in the final, watch Game 7, and Dan Kelly and Brian McFarland, probably some of the best announcing you ever heard. No, that wasn't Danny Gallivan who did the game. Danny never did too many Toronto games, because Dan Kelly, NHL 78, 79. Dan Kelly also did Game 6 against Boston, Montreal. But to see Lanny McDonald's, the joy when he was talking to different people. His good buddy Daryl Settler was behind him. It was a joyous time for Toronto. And when I criticize people, this is the Toronto Maple Leafs in 1978 had every potential to win a Stanley Cup in the 80s. But Harold Ballard fucked it up. There's a CBC documentary about that, the old cocksucker. But like I said, Clark Gillies, God bless his soul, he's dead. But he's ever asked, did he fail on the play? He did. Gillies could not play on defense. He broke through 3 players. Bossy, Trottier, Gillies, and Potvin. He could have easily scored, but they weren't good at defense. This was line against line, the best stronger line against the best Islander line. And Lanny McDonald knew how to go in the net. Like my dad said, you can't score. If you don't score, it's because you're not shooting. So, again, 4 minutes and so many seconds in overtime. 4 minutes of glory. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, Toronto Maple Leafs at the time were so popular. A lot of people believed they were going to beat Montreal. They were hoping to beat Montreal. But Montreal was part of that Guy Lafleur dynasty. And ironically, Pat Boutette stopped him winning 5 straight, but he wasn't with Toronto. He crippled Lafleur in the Hartford series in the early 1980 playoffs with Gordie Howe and Keon Lacroix and all that. But anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. This is for you. If you like what we're doing here with our NHL Vintage podcast, let us know. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. As we like to say in Cabbage Town, I think the Conacher said that best. Keep your stick in the ice.